Hello then everyone and welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Enfield Voices, and this is one of the regular webinars we do that talk about major issues. And this week we've been talking about climate change. We've been talking about how individuals can make a difference, how they can make a difference themselves in their lifestyle, how they can make a difference by collectively working together. We're taking that theme a bit further here by talking about a whole system that people can get involved in to make a difference, especially in a time of climate change, which is critical for all of us. And we've got Bernie Rees with us today, who's going to talk to us about that. Now, he's been involved in permaculture for a long time. He's a member of our local climate action forum. And he has, quite strong ideas about how we can move forward through using the ethics and principles of permaculture. So Bernie, thank you for joining us today. And maybe you could start by telling us just a little bit, not a lot because we've got a lot of questions, but a little bit about yourself and interests and the interests that have led you towards the ideas of permaculture.
Well, it's quite a long story, but I'll do my best. It was stimulated in 1966 by reading about a famine in India where the women were picking seeds out of buffalo dung to feed their children. And as a result of that, at one stage, I ended up thinking, what do I do with my life? But in a rather haphazard way, and ended up working in villages in India and found that I was totally ineffective with that. Couldn't make it work for me. I got ill, came back and thought, scratching around, trying to do things. What do I do instead? And around about the time when I was thinking, do I go into private business or what do I do next? I came across Agenda 21. That was in 1991. And then my efforts subsequently have been in the voluntary sector in Enfield, trying to put Agenda 21 into practice. And it's like pushing water uphill. And I found out that I was going about it the wrong way. So shortly after that, I came across permaculture, which gave me more of a solution because it involved personal responsibility and people care. And I'll say a bit more about those in a moment.
Okay, but you know what permaculture is, and some people do as well. A lot of people will have no idea what permaculture is. Yeah. So if you could describe it in a couple of sentences, what would you say permaculture was?
It's a system of design for creating sustainable human environments and settlements. It's a way of working with nature and taking account of everything that involves, including people's role in it. We are inevitably and indispensably linked to nature. We are part of it. And if we muck around with it, we muck around with ourselves and our life support system.
I gather that the whole idea of permaculture developed in the 1970s during the oil crisis. And it was a reaction to food insecurity and the desire for self-reliance. Is self-reliance one of the big building blocks of the permaculture idea?
Oh, absolutely right. And at the moment, it's so important because we look around us, we listen to all sorts of stories. You can quite easily get horrified to the point of immobility by seeing what's going on and how insignificant our personal contributions can be. There's climate change going on, there's floods everywhere, there's hurricanes, there's storms. We feel as if we're being tossed about in the face of uncontrollable forces. Permaculture is a way, as I said, of taking personal responsibility and understanding that major changes on this planet have only ever been achieved by a small group of people acting in a very determined fashion. That's Margaret Mead who came up with that idea. And so personal responsibility and small changes make a huge difference. This is more in line with the Buddhist economics that was first put forward by Schumacher and others.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about Schumacher because a lot of the things I've read about permaculture seems to, gel quite well with Schumacher's famous book, Small is Beautiful, and the whole movement of alternative technology.
Yes.
So has permaculture really, been given a sort of a step forward because of the Schumacher philosophy that we should behave in small and alternative ways where technology is for people, not for organizations?
I think there's a lot of overlap, and I don't think permaculture is anything new. It's just that I think the particular codification that Bill Mollison gave to it was something that's been going on for thousands of years, where people find ways of working effectively with nature. And you can see residues of this amongst the Buddhists, the Aborigines, some of what we call primitive people who have actually learned to work closely with nature and survive well because of it. It's certainly not what John Selwyn Gunner called, what was his term? Subsistence agriculture. There isn't very much understanding in the mainstream about this, but it is about what you might call right livelihood, about noticing what's going around you, taking time to see what's happening and understanding it, and taking the appropriate action to work with it rather than against it.
Yeah, so we can talk about how individuals can acquire that sort of culture, but I noticed that in the literature about permaculture, they talk about 12 principles and 3 ethics.
Yes.
We won't go through the whole 12 principles, but the 3 ethics seem to me quite important, and maybe you could describe to us what they are.
Yeah, brief word about the principles. They change, they come and go. There's different ways of describing them. It is a very complex way of describing it. It's something that I recommend people do and find out for themselves. But the ethics are very basic. And the first is earth care. The second is people care. And the third is fair shares. And I think it's undoubted that we have developed a way of living almost by accident, where we are trying to, as Francis Bacon put it, wrest nature's secrets from her. So we're trying to dominate nature as if we're the master race, as if we're in charge of everything. And so we tend to exploit not only our natural resources, but also other people who are not so fortunate to control them. And so we see a process of domination and competition. And a lot of people have sort of slipped into that culture of this is how we expect to live. There's a sense of entitlement to it. And it's taken us completely away from noticing what's going on around us. And our lifestyles, as a result, suffer because of it. And so the ethics really are, how do we look after people better? How do we look after ourselves, first of all, on the principle that psychologists say, if you don't love yourself, you can't love anyone else. Now, that's debatable, but I mean, it's a good place to start. So if you look after people, you look after people within the environment in which they're inevitably fixed. You look after the earth, you look after people too. And fair shares is just about saying, well, look, we need some kind of equitable distribution. It's impossible for us to live with any clear conscience on a planet where so many people are going without and so many people are dying unnecessarily. And it's because of restricted access to the resources they need to live a comfortable life.
I mean, earlier you were saying it sort of gels in with some Buddhist philosophy and so on. And that's made some people say that permaculture is a religion, and some have unfairly said it's a cult. What do you think of that response?
Have you ever been part of a group where everyone says, okay, what we want you to do is sit down and get some little post-it notes and stick them on you describing yourself. So you end up labeling yourself as certain things. And then you look at all the labels you pinned on yourself and you think to yourself, or you ask someone to tell you, does that sum you up? Do you like being labeled? Do you like being categorized as this or that or the other? I think there's a great deal more subtlety here. It's very easy for us to name something and then form an opinion about it as a result. I think permaculture, amongst other things, amongst other ways of thinking, asks us to look a little bit more carefully at what's going on and to understand more before we start to name and categorize. Because I think this separation, what some people have called reductionism, prevents us from seeing clearly how we can benefit from it ourselves.
But some people listening to you or reading, for example, the 12 principles, which looks at things like avoiding waste, valuing diversity, using renewables, and a lot more, they would say, well, we can do that anyhow, and we do that in our life, and we work with groups who do that. But, so what is permaculture more than that? Because we do that anyhow. I mean, could you describe to us, what makes permaculture different from doing all those things which many of us do anyhow?
Sure. It's a deliberate design in which we look at everything that we do and we say, what is the contribution that what are the demands that we're making on our environment? And I suppose one place to start would be, looking at where you live and do an audit of everything that comes into where you live and everything that goes out of it. And just spend a day or two sitting down thinking about, okay, you get water, electricity, gas, air, people, food, materials coming into the house. How do you use them? How do you dispose of things you don't want? What do you call waste? I mean, waste is an unused resource. It's like a weed. It's a plant in the wrong place, something whose function we don't understand yet. So it's a way of standing back from what we're doing and looking deliberately at everything that's going on, and looking not only at the material effects, but also the psychological effects on the people around us. And I think you only have to walk up and down any street in Enfield during the day and just notice what's happening to people. And it's almost a horror story. People are almost being driven around. Have you ever read Ionesco's play Rhinoceros, in which people are so madly running around trying to do things that UNESCO says they just turn into another kind of animal, which is not at all human. And I think we're in danger of losing our humanity unless we deliberately stop and look at how we're living our lives. Permaculture is a design process which allows us to do that in its totality.
But is it sort of a guidance for how individuals should behave, or is it a blueprint for how society should be organized?
There's either or question, Francis. I think permaculture, one of the key phrases in permaculture is both and. So it can be used for small processes, it can be used for little changes, it can be used for large processes, it can be used by farmers with thousands of acres, it can be used by somebody with a window box. It's just as relevant to both of them.
So for you, it's both. So let's look at those at personal, social, and global. What are the benefits then of permaculture in personal terms?
The main benefit, I think, is a psychological one. People feel empowered. Now, you can quite easily join a campaigning group, and I'm saying, yes, go and do that because it's necessary to draw attention to what we need to do to make changes. It has limited effectiveness. I spent a lot of my life campaigning with very limited effectiveness because the lack of progress tended to make me angry and therefore less effective. And then I alienated people instead of taking them with me. So yes, do the campaigning, but also if you want to feel as if you're doing something significant, if you make small changes in your life, first of all, personally, you feel better yourself. You feel as if you're actually making progress and doing something that's valuable, regardless of how you earn your living or where you go or who you know, you're actually doing something in your own life. And that acts as an example for the people around you. They see something a little bit different. Maybe they don't understand why you're doing it or what you're doing, but it is an example of doing something in a different way. And when we're living in a culture where everyone's expected to live the same way, or the pressures are to conform or do things in a certain way, and you know what I'm talking about there, then the pressures can be such that we do that without thinking. So we live a life of thoughtlessness. So permaculture allows us to stand back. Next, globally, there are a huge number of people doing this now. Bill Mollison coined the term permaculture in 1974. And if you just look at those people who are practicing permaculture, in 1991, he said there were 300,000 people around the world doing it. We're 29 years on from there, and there must be well over 1 million people trying to make changes like this. Now it's a drop in the bucket compared with 6.5 billion, but it's steadily increasing and the awareness is growing. And we feel as if we're part of something which is significant and valuable and helping to make a change that's needed to what I call the prevailing culture, which has outlived its usefulness.
So at the base, this is a way of empowering yourself in order that you can make change.
Absolutely right. And also being part of a worldwide web of people who are actually doing something useful. And you can get a huge amount of support and encouragement and advice and responses from that group of people.
And in social terms, then, what would you say was the benefit of permaculture there?
In social terms?
Yeah, I mean, in people working together in groups and changing society, not just in their own personal behavior.
It's much more fun. All you feel as if you're sharing things with people. There's a lot of enjoyment. I mean, yes, you can enjoy yourself on your own. I find it's much more enjoyable when you can argue like hell with a group of people and fall out and disagree and laugh together. And it's tremendous social experience, and it gives you a hook to hang your companionship on, and a way of sharing a new skill, a way of discovering things you can do, and using what your particular gifts are to contribute to what other people's gifts are, and many parts have made a perfect counsel. Again, Francis Bacon, but when he was in his sensible mode instead of his raping nature mode.
So, are there groups of people who meet together who are practicing permaculture, or is it an individual sort of actualization of yourself? I mean, do people meet together and decide how they can do things differently?
Yes, I mean, there are permaculture groups around the UK. There are ones quite local in Enfield. There are people who are, I would say, they're practicing permaculture, but they wouldn't call it that. But they are trying to make a difference by the ways in which they're doing things in a new way. I mean, I ran an environment shop in Edmonton Green for 11 years in which we tried a lot of these permaculture ideas out. And I don't say we're terribly successful, but as a result of that, we came in touch with a lot of really lovely, good-hearted people who are trying their best to do things. And this is a network which can be expanded to include a lot of people now who are looking for different ways of doing things and thinking, well, I've heard about all this climate change, well, what can I do myself? And there is a support group for people there, and there are local people doing it that you can connect with.
And on a global basis, what are the benefits there? What is the impact on permaculture on the way the globe is developing or not developing in our modern age?
The global benefits are a lot of people are doing things in a different way and demonstrating how we can live a successful life and feed ourselves properly without undue reliance on a technology which is threatening to make things worse. Rather than having a company like, I don't know, Monsanto buying up the rights to produce seeds, they want to own the neem trees in India so they can sell them to farmers, they can increase their profits. What we're doing instead is helping people to learn about what they can grow, how they can live in a way where it's less exploitative, they're less exposed to exploitation, they can start providing for themselves and do things for themselves. We have food security at the moment. So much of it is wasted by the way we actually produce it and distribute it. And I would say that of all the total amount of food produced in the world, we probably get something like 5% of its nutritional value at the moment. Permaculture is a way of changing that so we can increase that percentage. There's so much wastage, it's a horror story. And people are relying on this to say, we need to have a new technology, for example, GM foods and seeds, new seeds and developing this and that and do agriculture in this industrialized way. It doesn't work that way. This is about giving people the power back to be able to grow the food themselves. And that's such an important thing to do. And not only do it themselves, but doing it in company with other people doing the same thing. So the communities become stronger and healthier and more self-reliant.
I mean, the problem is in a time of climate change, people are becoming increasingly frightened. Young people, particularly because they know it's going to affect them in the years to come.
Yes.
I mean, can permaculture help to overcome that fear? Can it give them hope? Or does it give them false hope that the problem's too great that even permaculture can't address it?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about ways of overcoming fear. What I do know from personal experience is if you let fear take over your life, it immobilizes you. And quite often, having something practical you can do, having something you can focus on, which is useful, where you know you're developing your own ability, your own skill, and you're doing it in company with good people, that is often a way of encouraging ourselves, giving us back the courage to face what we need to face. Now, the uncertainty is huge, and I'm not trying to underestimate it. And some people are under dire threat of losing their livelihoods, losing their land. People are coming into the UK in increasing numbers because they think that this end of the boat isn't sinking and they will have some safety and security here, but we're just as much under threat. In the face of that, we know that human beings are adaptable. We know that we can be self-reliant. We know that we're cooperative species. We know that we're capable of doing the most wonderful things. Permaculture gives us one way of increasing that understanding and developing those skills that we're going to need in future to face these crises. So it's a way of empowering and encouraging ourselves.
I mean, maybe it's being unfair, but you make it sound like both a practice and a faith. Am I sort of reading that wrong?
I put the two together. The faith comes from doing things. I mean, faith for me is like love. Love is not a description. It's a verb. It's something that you do. Permaculture is something that you do. And as you do it, and the way in which you do it, it becomes more valuable for yourself. It becomes more valuable for the people around you. It's a truly cooperative thing to do, but it's a deliberate design skill, which means we're not doing it in ignorance. We're not relying on somebody else's idea of what we should be doing. We're developing our own ideas and our own ways and our own confidence as a result of that.
I mean, do you have any sort of practical examples of permaculture groups who have got together and done some really significant things that will make people understand what can be done?
I suppose there are hundreds of examples around the world. I mean, we've only got half an hour, Francis. There are groups of people who get together and decide they're going to live off-grid. They're going to develop the energy themselves. One of the principles of permaculture is conserve and manage energy, use energy. Another one is a minimum effort for maximum result. I particularly like that. It's a sort of lazy man's charter. Don't do very much and get a good result. But it's a principle of permaculture. Another one is stand and look at what's going on around you. So I suggest people who want to find out more about what the benefits of permaculture have been and how people use it, just go and look. Just go and look. There's plenty of information there on the web, plenty of information through social contacts. There's lots and lots of places, lots and lots of things going on. And there are people who develop farms. There's one lady here in Sussex who's changed her whole way of farming into a more sustainable form of agriculture. In the teeth of, for example, the National Farmers Union, which says we need more tractors and bigger combine harvesters and more pesticides. And she's saying, no, 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 that way is death. It reduces it and it depletes the soil. We get huge runoff, we get huge pollution. I'm going to do my farming in a different way. And there are lots of people who are now changing to different ways of working, as well as those people who grow their own tomatoes in window boxes. And there's the Coriander Club down on the Berners Estate in Tower Hamlets, where a group of women from the Bangladeshi community have got together to grow their own food on the land around their council blocks. There's wonderful examples everywhere you look.
But are those examples of people who have been influenced by permaculture, or have they done it anyway?
Maybe. As I said, permaculture is just a hook. It's a name. There are people who have been practicing permaculture for thousands of years. I'm glad they're doing it this way. I'm not saying that this all should be called permaculture. There's no ownership involved here. It's a skill. And if you develop the skill, I don't care whether you call it a BlackBerry skill or a Red Riding Hood skill or a permaculture skill. It's a skill about living. And permaculture is just a useful way for me of summarizing all of that personal development and social responsibility and togetherness, which means that we can learn about what's going on in this crisis and make the changes necessary to deal better with it. And that, I find, is very empowering. Because I've got a big family. I've got four daughters and five granddaughters. I seem to be generating a new race of Amazon women, and I need to give them some kind of hope for the future.
Yes, Amazon women is the way of the future, I think. Probably right. But you know, what do you say about the people who make this criticism? And they say, you know, permaculture and movements like that are a diversion, because the big issue is lowering carbon emissions, and what we should be doing is campaigning against government, against corporations, to divest from fossil fuels, from stop using fossil fuels, not fiddling around growing coriander. How do you react to that criticism?
As I said before, it's both and. Anyone who wants to go campaigning, I'm not going to try and stop them. And I'm sure we can find more effective ways of campaigning than we have done up to now. I don't think standing in a street kettled up with water cannon and police in armor all around us like some kind of medieval battle formation is a good way of producing social harmony. So it's both and. If we're doing things ourselves to make a change, and we're asking other people to take a look at it and think about what they're doing, and wondering whether the system they are fighting so hard to preserve is actually doing a lot of damage, we need to ask those questions, of course, but we need to be doing something positive ourselves. So both and.
So you could actually sit in the middle of the street and protest, whilst at the same time grow coriander.
Yeah, the coriander grows on its own. It doesn't need my help. I just need to harvest it. The ideal of permaculture for food security is that we design a system quite deliberately, which is self-sustaining, so that all we have to do every year is go and harvest the results, rather than put backbreaking work or excess oil products into the land, which degrades the land, and we get lower and lower, we get reducing returns from our efforts. Permaculture is a way of increasing the yields as a result of our efforts. As I said, minimum input and maximum return. So I can go processing once I've got my food security sorted out, as long as I put a bit of effort into both of it.
I guess what people can say about the permaculture movement, if you want to call it that, is it deals with the here and now. It's not about, thinking about what should happen in the future and writing letters to your MP. It's about doing something right now at present. And is that the great power of it?
You have to be careful with that one. I would say yes, but it's a qualified yes. A lot of people say, I used to be told when I was young, you probably were too, don't just stand there, do something. And I think permaculture gives us an alternative, which is don't just do something, stand there. Yes, get involved, but watch carefully what you're doing. Find out what it is you're involving yourself in. Is your skill something that's contributing to a better solution, or is it making things worse? It's about total awareness of what's going on inside you and around you. And permaculture gives us the tools in which we can help to work that out. If you go at something like a bull at a gate, you can end up doing far more damage. Personal experience, I spent a lot of my life doing that. Permaculture allows me to stand back and say, hey, Bernie, look, just take a few minutes to look at what's going on here and do something sensible for a change. So I think, yes, it helps you to do something in the here and now, but you've got to be careful how you do it.
Well, I guess, doing damage in our life and the movements we've been involved is something we're all guilty of. We've all done it. The thing about
I don't know what you've done, Francis.
I don't know what I was sort of formed in the 1960s, and we all forget what we've done. But permaculture has got that name, culture, and cultural change is a long process. It doesn't happen quickly. Climate change is an emergency. Now, how do you think we can get the momentum of people together in time to make the changes necessary? How will people get started to practice it and do it? And can we do it in time?
Okay. I'm listening to climate change and I'm aware of the urgency, but I know that if people respond to it and start running around, there's a danger that we will start doing things as a kind of knee-jerk reaction in a state almost of panic, blind panic. Oh, we've got to do something, quick, let's rush on. And I don't think that's going to help. Not only because some of the actions might be very ineffective, but also because the way in which we do them is counterproductive. It doesn't help us to live in a balanced and thoughtful way. And when you say that it takes time for cultures to change, maybe. Cultures are usually changed quite radically as a result of the urgency of the situation. So I don't think there's any necessity that culture will take a long time to change. Culture responds to the environment. What we need is awareness of what we're doing. So yes, with a sense of urgency, let's look carefully at what needs to be done and not rush off and do something straight away and start going like the sky's falling in, because you happen to have an acorn drop in your head.
So you think that culture can change by serious events happening? It makes people's framework, their minds change. Climate change is that serious event. So you think that will enable culture to change more quickly than usual?
One of the permaculture ethics is people care. It's caring for people. It's caring for ourselves as human beings. It's caring for ourselves and others. And I know that if you try to enforce change if we try and enforce change on our fellow human beings, we meet a lot of resistance. I think people care means being aware of where people are at the moment and suggesting in gentler ways, in more loving, caring ways, things that people can do themselves to make the changes that are necessary. And it's not just because there's climate change out there, it's because it is a better way of living. It's a more satisfactory way of living. It's a gentle way of being part of this planet. We're helping people to enjoy life more. And I think that's something that is often missing. People are rushing around trying to do things in such a desperate way and multitasking, for God's sake, when they're actually like hamsters running on a treadmill. And I don't think that is a very good way to live. And I think a little bit of time to look at what's going on and think about our contribution and say, if I just made a small change, if you try and change the way you live your life immediately all at once, every aspect of it, you will drive yourself mad. So I think small changes, incremental changes, bit by bit, in a gentle way, with the support of our friends and our neighbors, is much more effective than any amount of waving banners and shouting at people about climate change.
Okay, well, we sort of got to the end of our 30 minutes now. So
already,
it goes very quickly. But you know, if anybody was interested in finding out more about permaculture, or locally here in Enfield or nationally, where would they go? How would they find out, and who would they make contact with?
There's a number of different ways of doing it. There are national organizations with permaculture. There are international permaculture organizations. Locally, by all means, contact me. You can distribute my email, telephone number, whatnot. I don't mind. People contact me and ask about it. I've got a number of colleagues around the UK. Things that I don't know, I'm not aware of, I can put them in touch with them. So there is a network, as I said. And if you want to go and look for yourself online, you can do that. There are introductory courses. We're thinking of arranging some ourselves in Edmonton, doing it online because it's difficult to meet in groups nowadays. So that's a process I've started. As a result of your asking me to do this, I've been thinking on my own for myself, excuse me, what are the things that I could do in order to share the information that I've discovered? I'm not saying I'm an especially gentle place to start, but I can find gentle people for you to work with.
Okay, well, I mean that's useful information, and if you do get the courses going and work in Edmonton, let us know about it, and we can let people know about that, which would be really, really great. But you know, thank you for doing it, because I think some people didn't understand what permaculture is. I think they have a better understanding now, and clearly the whole idea of empowering individuals at a time of crisis and despair is really, really important. So I think, you know, your contribution has been really valuable, and I think will be helpful to a lot of people. So Bernie, thank you for doing this today, and you know, having talked about it, and I'm sure we could have talked for a lot more, we'll end this interview now.
Thank you for asking me, Francis. Goodbye.